You can
Good
start.
morning from Los Angeles. It's just after 8 a.m. here, so it's very special. What my presentation is on is the relationship between technology and repertoire at the dawn of the acoustic era, which I am defining as 1900 for the purposes of this. Because this is a conference about 78s, I'm going to do just a little bit about basic things before starting, because you never know about the knowledge of the audience. So what I have on the left here is a phonograph, and what's on the right is a gramophone, in the way that people spoke about these things at that time. So Edison cylinder players were known as phonographs, and what we know as cylinders were records then, and disc players were known as gramophones. I'm not going to do that in talking about this, because I have found out that it can be confusing for 21st century folks. And also it's confusing for me sometimes just trying to start research on this. So I'm going to be using cylinder player and disc player, and cylinder player for Edison and Columbia. And really record or disc record for what we consider record players now. The question that I'm going to be dealing with, and I think I can answer a little bit of it. I don't think that I have the answer, but it's why was the repertoire so different for each medium? And the other thing I want to delimit a little bit here is with cylinders, I'm going to stay primarily with Edison. And I don't know about, I don't know how many Edison cylinder players were in Europe. So I don't know how familiar you are with them. You're certainly familiar with disc records, but I'm going to stay with Edison and primarily with Victor. So this is really about what was going on in the United States in the time period between 1900 and 1925. Okay, so the origin of my question, because questions have origins, I think. And my specialty is American Indian music. I'm actually an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I write about powwows. So how did I stumble into this? And the answer is I inherited a bunch of machines. And in this case, what happened is I had an aunt and an uncle who lived about 60 miles from here in the Inland Empire, and my uncle just bought things and threw them into his workshop. So what was in the workshop was an Edison Ambarola 6A, which when I got it did not look like this one, but it does now. So I really had it worked on. And there was an Edison standard phonograph. And then in the house, there was a Columbia Graphanola Mignonette. And I will say that I have found, just reading about the names that people came up with for record players, it's just fascinating, because mignonette is the name of a fish sauce. So I don't know why they came up with that. I assume they thought it was French. My Ambarola plays 4-minute blue Ambarol cylinders, and the standard plays 2-minute gold molded cylinders. My Ambarola is in Idlewild in my cabin, and the standard is in Idlewild now in my sister's cabin. We took them up there, and then the Graphanola Mignonette is in my living room here. So that's where they are located. Okay, and then what I call the hell thing. This was out in my uncle's workshop with stuff piled all over it, including the Ambarola machine. And it contains about 250 or so cylinders. They seem to all be blue Ambarols. They don't look like that in this, but what I have found out about blue Ambarol cylinders is they actually come in a variety of bluish colors, almost all the way to black. And sometimes the only way you can really be sure is to go outside and put it in the sunlight and look at it. And there were another 50 or so gold molded cylinders in the house. So this is in my uncle's workshop. It's a separate outbuilding in the backyard. And this is in, rural Riverside, to give you a sense. For those of you who don't know where that's at, it's about 60 miles east of Los Angeles, a little bit out in the desert. And I sold the cabinet. Yeah, I mean, there were people who were saying, no, 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 don't sell it, but I did. And I used the money to fix up the talking machines and get them working. Now, what I have on the right here is what the cabinet ended up being. I sold it to a collector who put money into it, and it's really a beautiful thing. And I'm glad that he has it. We just didn't have room to have this thing. And we just took the cylinders and threw them in open boxes at the time. We were at my sister's place. Okay, so but this thing was really difficult to deal with. We had to get it out of that workshop, and the feet fell off, and haul it and carry it into a car, and it was a pain. So for me, this became a kind of a journey, because I didn't know anything about cylinder players. I did know about 78 players because I grew up with them. I'm 62. And when I was a kid, my mother had 78s. And we had an old turntable, and we could play them. And my mother's 78s were all opera, every single one. And they were Victor Red Seal. So I grew up with them. They were familiar. And the only thing that was different for me was having to change out the needle every time, but that was not a difficult thing to discover. And I'm going to go ahead and just take this moment to thank all the different people in the Antique Phonograph Society and especially on the Facebook page, which I access. They're the people that convinced me that if I put any record made later than 1925 on my graphanola, it would just simply blow up. It's been an interesting experience, but there's a tremendous amount of knowledge represented with the people on that page, and a fair amount of crankiness, but that's okay, because I learned how to deal with this machine, the one I had, the graphanola, through those people. So Edison cylinders, going back to them, no family history at all. I mean, my uncle, who was an uncle by marriage, had bought a bunch of players at estate auctions and essentially warehoused them in piles in the backyard. That's all I knew. So we had to start learning about them. And almost all of them are amberolas, or excuse me, blue amberols is what they're called. And I'm lucky in the sense that these things have spent the last century in Riverside, which has a desert climate. So far I have not found any that are warped, which is kind of neat. They're all playable. The other cylinders, which play on the standard machine, and a bunch of those were in the house, are what are called gold molded, and they're from an earlier time period. One of the ways we were initially being able to tell them apart, because we didn't have most of the cases, is I'll be honest here, we're taking these things out, throwing them into boxes and things, and my sister's dog grabbed a gold molded cylinder, ran off with it, and ate it. So that's one of the ways I figure there's delicious waxy things in there for the dog, but that made us much more careful. And then I just put the one on top here. This is a beautiful, Edison marketed these for as specialty things. This is where he put Western art music. And I just put it there because I really like the color. I would love to have one of these and just have it in the case. I would love to have a car that is this color. It's a great color. But this is what we had. And what I have had to do, and I haven't finished yet, is take these boxes of loose amberol cylinders and clean each one with, I'm using actually alcohol and cotton pads. And then the top of it, I'm using a white crayon and running it over there and wiping it out so I can get back some of the, some of the title of it, because these were also covered in dirt, but they're all pretty functional, is what I'm finding out, which is the neat part about them. Now, in terms of amberols and Edison things, I have essentially a collection, and it's fascinating. I'm actually an ethnomusicologist. One of the things that's neat about this collection is it represents a person, and that what that person listened to at a particular period of time. And I'd say that it spans the whole time of Blue Ambrels, from what I can tell. So we're looking at 1914 to 1929 with these, lots of them. And it's just interesting for me to see what this person bought. And then also to start to look into these and look at what Edison had recorded, because he was apparently very hands-on with what he wanted on his cylinders. So I had to just create categories for them as I started to clean them and then shelve them. And what I found in my particular collection is lots of things from the Hawaiian craze of that period of time. An awful lot of what I call maudlin Celtic-ish stuff. I mean, 5 different versions of I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen. I probably have 20 cylinders where the tunes have the names of states. I have coon songs. I'm really uncomfortable with those. I will tell you, I was initially just going to throw them out. And then a friend of mine said, no, collect them up. And when you have them all, donate them to what's called the Jim Crow Museum, which is in Michigan. So that's what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to play any of them. And then there are strange things. There are just weird rambling stories, and there are cylinders of whistling. There are a lot of World War I songs. I've got When Pershing Crosses the Rhine, for example. Now, the best ones, the most fun ones, are essentially Tin Pan Alley sheet music, vaudeville, that kind of thing. These are the good ones. And I have a few foxtrots and rags, but not too many. And people in the Phonograph Society and the Record Society have said, well, the most valuable Edison records are the ones, or Edison cylinders, that are numbered 5,000 and above, that are foxtrots. And I can understand why they're valuable, because there aren't very many of them. I have marimba bands, duets by artists who I have no clue who they are, a few marches, Billy Murray, and probably more Billy Murray than I think, because he sang under different names, but those tend to be some of the better ones. And then in terms of what we would call classical music or art music, I have 2 Verdi opera choruses, and both are in English, and that's it. So what I started to do was think, you know, what is this stuff? Who listened to this? This was just not music kind of in my realm of being. And then I thought, I'll give you a little bit of a sense. This is actually my player, kind of mid refurbishment. I was lucky because the insides of it were in really good condition, although it needed a spring, and I had the cabinet just completely redone. One thing that I've discovered about these machines is they're just loud if they're working properly, and this one is loud. And the only way to really reduce the volume is to stuff a sock into it. I think with the earlier machines, which had external horns, you could choose a different horn, perhaps. But disc players, you can do much more with volume. You can change needles and Victrolas, anything that's an Ola, like my Graphenola with an internal speaker, has a way to work with the sound. I mean, they have louvers on them that you can open and close and things like that. So you can make it less loud, but Edison players, they're just loud. So this is just a little bit of it. It's going to sound like the machine is really loud at first. But then what happens is the song is louder. So you actually don't hear the machine noise once it gets going.
Tara, do you hear me?
Pardon?
Yeah, we didn't hear the sound. So maybe if you could just share the screen once again, and then when you share the screen, just click share the sound as well. It's at the bottom.
You know what? This is not important enough to do that. I mean, I'll tell you, there's somebody singing "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles," It's a foxtrot orchestra thing. And it's actually, this one sounds good. This one sounds good. The Billy Murray ones sound good. I have things like Ain't We Got Fun. So I do have some good cylinders within my collection of crud. But yeah, no, I'm not gonna, we don't have time for that, I think. This is the only sound file that I have. So I will just move on. There we go. So let's talk about Eldridge Johnson for a minute.
What's the name of the email husband?
Oh, okay. Anyway, Eldridge Johnson was the founder of Victor Records. He initially was sort of working with Emil Berliner, and it's too complicated to talk about. But these figures are really interesting, just as people. The earliest Victor records were Victor Monarch, and then you have Victor and Victrola Red Seal, which is what I have a bunch of, and what my mother had. So the Red Seals are the ones that I'm familiar with. Then Black Label for popular international novelties. 7-inch, there are not as many of those, actually, but there are plenty of 10-inch records. What I find fascinating are all the single face ones where you've got everything only on one side, and the reasons for that. He didn't go to double face until after 1924, at least for Red Seal. And these are all lateral groove. I assume you guys know that Edison players and pate players are actually what are called vertical, so that the needle runs on the bottom of it. So these are a bit different from each other. And I did have to say that in 1904, someone actually patented the concept of the double-faced record. There are a lot of different theories on why Johnson didn't do, double-faced records. It could have been the patent. But the other things that I've read is he just simply thought that giving people music on two sides of the record was giving them too much value. It was literally, they could just buy another record rather than having records sound from both sides. Now, Edison cylinders, and here's our friend Thomas Edison with a really early player. Edison cylinders, cost-wise, the earliest ones are brown wax. These are 2 minutes, and they're 50 cents each. These are the ones that if you find them out there in an antique store, they tend to be covered with mold. There's also what's called the brown wax concert. So even at this time, classical music was a premium. And these were much more expensive, and then they were reduced to 75 cents. Then we have gold molded. Those are the ones, I've got some of those, or I guess my sister does now. They're 2 minutes long. We have Edison Grand Opera cylinders, which are big, and you had to have a different machine to play them, so that didn't work very well. And then amberol, and then blue amberol, and those were the ones that were in production the longest, as well as royal purple. The thing with amberols that was different is they were made out of celluloid, and they were much more durable at the time. Although, again, nowadays people tend to get them and they're warped. But I will say that the dog has never gone after the amberol cylinders or the blue amberols, which is good. And then after that, Edison decided that he needed to change to a disc format with some of his stuff. So he came out with the Edison Diamond disc in 1915 to 1925. I'm going to show you a few of those. And the diamond discs were actually $1.50. But in general, most of these cylinders are 50 cents each or $5 a dozen. And the cylinders all run at 160 RPM. So it runs considerably faster than, record discs. Okay, now this is where, to me, things get interesting, is recording times. From 1895 to 1908, Edison cylinders were at a maximum about 2 minutes and 20 seconds long. And disc records could record out to just over 4 minutes. So I think that the longest ones I've seen are 4 minutes and 40 seconds. But somebody out there will tell me there's a 5-minute one, which is fine. But just one side for the Red Seals. But this difference, it's a 6-year period. gave Eldridge Johnson an edge in signing contracts with opera stars because opera arias tend to be right in the 4-minute range and choruses. And this is not something that I was necessarily aware of until I started buying these records. That opera has a kind of its own rhythm in terms of how long arias and choruses and things go. So what happened is, what Edison had to do is, for example, take marches. And when he recorded marches, you didn't get the repeats. I mean, they had to actually cut things down to fit them on the 2-minute cylinders. And one thing that a friend of mine, actually she's a former student in Texas, told me, she's at Texas Tech now, is Edison, Mexico, had a lot of musicians cut traditional songs from longer down to 2 minutes and 20 seconds so they could get them onto these cylinders. And then the songs never got longer again. So when they play them in Mexico now, they're 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So Edison actually had an effect because of his recording technology with the length of songs as they are performed there today. Okay. Now, how much do these things cost? Well, I was surprised. Victor Black labels are 75 cents. The red seals are supposed to be $1.50, except for certain premium artists. And I apologize for the shiny things here, but that's my cell phone a couple nights ago, taking photos of records in what is now my record collection, because I've started buying them. So for what you have is $3 for Caruso and $3 for Nellie Melba, and then $4 for a Victor orchestra with Italian singers, and then $5, this Victrola down here. And can you see this? $5 for a single-sided record. And these are all right around 4 minutes. Now, I looked up $5 in, from that period of time in today's American dollar money, and it's $150. That is hard for me to believe, but the idea that somebody is paying that kind of money for opera is just so surprising to me. Nevertheless, what Johnson was doing is making this a premium genre. I was just reading in the New York Times about this. It was either the Times or the Washington Post, about the onset of premium things that you just pay a little more for, and the kind of cultural capital that you get when you have premium items. And so that's going on here too. I know that Mark Katz, who may be in the audience, he better be in the audience actually. I know that Mark Katz wrote about the idea of people being uplifted by good music. And I think that some of that was going on, but I think this was also a status symbol happening with these things. And by this period of time, Edison was just not really competing very well in these styles of music with what he did, even with the Edison discs. Okay, I'll hurry and finish here. Other kinds of media. Edison eventually created his own records on what's called the Edison Diamond Disc Player. I've got some of them down here. I don't know how familiar you all are, but they're like giant pancakes. They're really big, and the players are very different from the way that standard kind of Grafanola or Victrola or something, where they move straight across. It's hard to explain. But anyway, he did sell a fair number of these. And then up here on the right, we have Lambert cylinders, which were an early celluloid cylinder, and they come in odd colors, at least for me. And Edison naturally sued the company and shut them down, because that's what people did. They did a whole lot of lawsuits, patent lawsuits and things like this. So these were celluloid, meaning the dog would not eat them, but he didn't want competition in terms of cylinders. And if y'all didn't know it, Edison had a pretty profound hearing loss. So we have somebody who didn't hear very well, who is determining musical taste in the United States. Okay, and then another kind of record that I was just alerted to maybe last week, somebody in the Phonograph Society sent me a private message, are these kinds of records called Little Wonders. And they're actually records. They're 5.5 inches, and they're 5 to 10 cents each. Now stop and think about that. 5 cents or $5 for Caruso. It's got something very different going on here. And these were sold in dime stores, dollar stores, those kinds of places. And, you know, I'm going to have to look into them a little bit more, because right now I'm looking kind of into the economics of records and what they cost. Now, these are what I call Edison people.
Yeah, Tara, I'm so sorry. I will have to ask you to maybe shorten up and come to a
No, this
conclusion.
is the second to the last slide. I'm almost done. Okay, so these are Edison people. They're out in the country. They're rural. They have a horse. They have all these sorts of things. And I'm not sure whether or not Edison catered to their taste or created it, but these things were cheaper, and his audience was very much rural people, especially at the end. Okay, and then we have Victor. And Victor is urban and sophisticated and has Nipper. So my conclusion here, I do have one, is that the difference in repertoire, a fundamental difference in repertoire between these two different medium, is that what it came down to is Victor could record things that were 4 minutes, and initially Edison could not. And that technology really dictated what each company recorded for their audience. So that's my presentation. I will stop sharing.